officially transferred the house to my parents, knowing deep down that a divorce was becoming inevitable. The love that once held our marriage together had withered into something cold and unrecognizable. With a detached, almost mechanical expression, Henry pointed at me and demanded that I leave. His voice was laced with venom, each word dripping with contempt. His parents stood beside him, their approving smiles confirming that they shared his cruel satisfaction. Despite the hostility that filled the air, I stayed composed because this moment, as painful as it was, had been long anticipated. I had packed my bags days before, prepared to walk away the instant he crossed that final line. Without another word, I lifted my suitcase, straightened my back, and walked out the door. They watched me go, unaware of the consequences that would soon follow. My name is Amy, and I recently turned 45. It has been many years since Henry and I were married, and our son, once the bright center of our shared dreams, has grown, graduated from a top university, and started a happy life of his own. Watching him succeed fills me with pride, yet the emptiness that lingers in my heart is a quiet reminder of all that went wrong between his father and me. Once upon a time, I was just an ordinary office worker, living a predictable routine, but everything changed when a close friend introduced me to the art of making handmade accessories. What began as a simple hobby soon became a full-time passion. I started teaching others how to create jewelry and crafts. And that shift, from hobby to profession, transformed my life. It brought joy, peace, and a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Some might say it's risky to turn a passion into a career, but for me, it became a lifeline, a way to heal and rediscover myself. Henry and I met by chance years ago through my previous job. He worked at a client company, and our professional encounters soon turned into long conversations, laughter, and eventually, love. We married for affection, not convenience, believing that love could carry us through anything, and for a while, it did. After 4 blissful years, we welcomed a lively baby boy. Those early years were filled with simple joys, late-night feedings, shared meals, and plans for the future. But time, as it often does, changed us. The gentle man I once adored hardened into someone bitter and impatient. He began treating me less like a partner and more like a servant. His temper grew sharp, his words cutting deeper with every argument. The home that once echoed with laughter became a battleground of tension and silence. When he quit his job without reason, the weight of responsibility fell entirely on my shoulders. I worked tirelessly, teaching, saving, and managing every bill. Our mortgage loomed like a shadow over me, yet I refused to give up. I loved our home. It was more than a structure of bricks and walls. It was the dream I had built from my own hard-earned savings. I had personally financed its reconstruction, pouring every bit of myself into every detail. The kitchen, spacious, sunlit, and filled with warm wood and soft colors, was my favorite place. It reflected my creativity and independence, everything I had become. Though Henry offered opinions here and there, I was the one who covered every expense, ensuring that my taste and vision were realized. But instead of pride, Henry responded with resentment. He claimed I'd ignored his ideas, calling the renovations wasteful, accusing me of throwing money away. It didn't matter that I'd built this home for both of us. He saw only the ways it bruised his ego. At first, I tried to reason with him. I told myself he was stressed, that maybe the weight of debt was making him irritable. But as months passed, he grew crueler. His anger became childish, scattering trash on the floor, leaving dishes unwashed, even deliberately staining the counters, just to provoke me. I cleaned in silence, pretending not to notice, though inside I was breaking. Then, one quiet afternoon, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the sound startled me. Before I could answer, Henry rushed ahead, as if he already knew who it was. Moments later, the living room filled with cheerful voices and laughter, familiar, yet unwelcome. When I stepped into the room, my heart sank. There they were, my in-laws, Willie and Catherine. Our relationship had always been tense, marked by thinly veiled disdain and silent judgment. From the day we announced our marriage, they made their disapproval clear. My background wasn't refined enough for their taste, and they never let me forget it. Even on our wedding day, their smiles were stiff, their congratulations insincere. Over the years, their visits had been rare, but each one left me uneasy. And now, Seeing them again without warning, I felt the same cold wave of discomfort. Still, I greeted them politely. They brushed past me without so much as a glance, exploring the house as if it already belonged to them. Catherine's eyes swept over the kitchen, her envy thinly disguised as admiration. Willie trailed behind, muttering about modern tastes and expensive details. Henry, on the other hand, glowed with pride. He guided them from room to room, speaking with enthusiasm I hadn't seen from him in years. It was strange, he seemed almost revived in their presence. When they finally settled in the living room, Henry barked at me to prepare tea and snacks. His tone was sharp, authoritative, as though I were the hired help. I forced a smile, holding my composure as I hurried to the kitchen. I brewed tea, arranged cookies on plates, and tried to act like a gracious host, even as humiliation burned inside me. When I returned, Willie was already halfway through his tea. "The interior looks good," he said flatly. That was the only compliment he offered. Henry, however, looked pleased, beaming like a child receiving approval. Then, without so much as a glance in my direction, he turned to his parents and said, "You should move in with us." The words struck me like thunder. I froze, unable to speak. Catherine's face lit up instantly. She didn't hesitate to say how nice it would be to live closer to their son. They ignored me completely, as if my opinion didn't exist. When they left later that evening, I stood by the window, watching them disappear down the road. Henry was grinning, waving at them. I hadn't seen him that happy in years. That night, the silence between us felt heavier than ever. Something inside me shifted. From that day forward, the visits became relentless. At first, they came once or twice a month, then it was every weekend, and soon, they were there almost daily. Their criticisms sharpened with each visit, mocking my cooking, my teaching, even the way I arranged the living room. Henry said nothing. In fact, he joined in at times, complaining that I didn't respect his parents enough. When I wasn't home, they came anyway. I'd return from work to find the house in disarray, beer cans, cigarette butts, food crumbs, and the faint stench of alcohol lingering in the air. I'd clean silently, tears sometimes slipping down my face when no one was looking. Henry blamed me for everything, for his stress, for their unhappiness, even for our son's distance. It was always my fault. But I knew then that something deeper was happening, something calculated. Every visit, every insult, every strange conversation between Henry and his parents, it all began to feel like a setup. And I was right. Because the day would soon come when their smiles would fade, and their carefully woven plan would begin to unravel in the most unexpected way. Cans, empty bottles, and the sour stench of spilled alcohol had become a regular part of my living room. Each stain on the rug felt like a mark of decay, not just of the home I had built, but of the marriage I had once believed in. Despite my objections, Henry brushed off every complaint, claiming he needed to relax. The smell of beer, the sight of cigarette ashes on the windowsill, and the constant clutter made it hard to recognize the house that had once brought me so much pride. Ironically, even as he contributed nothing to the household, Henry never missed an opportunity to accuse me of not doing enough. His words, sharp and cutting, were meant to wound, but the real damage came from the silence that followed, the silence of someone who had stopped caring long ago. The situation worsened when I discovered Henry's new obsession with gambling. Betting slips littered his study desk and stuffed his jacket pockets. Each one represented money that I had earned through long hours of work and teaching, money now being thrown away in pursuit of reckless thrills. When I confronted him, he laughed, dismissing my concerns as nagging. "I'll win it all back," he said once, his tone light, his eyes hollow. But I knew better. Each loss pulled us further into a hole, and I was the only one trying to climb out. As his debts grew, so did the presence of his parents. They began visiting more often, always finding reasons to stop by, usually when I wasn't home. Their timing was deliberate, and their intentions were becoming clear. They saw me not as their daughter-in-law, but as an intruder in a home they believed belonged to their son. Then came the day that would change everything. I returned home earlier than usual one afternoon, tired but relieved to be done with work. As I stepped through the door, I froze. Henry sat comfortably in the living room, his parents beside him, chatting and sipping tea as if they owned the place. My presence clearly caught them off guard. "Oh, "You're home early," Catherine said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Willie didn't even bother to greet me, he just leaned back and continued his conversation. The disrespect was staggering. I asked what they were doing there, but Henry merely smirked, avoiding my eyes. The casual insolence of the three of them filled the room like smoke. My frustration boiled beneath the surface, but I didn't let it spill over. Instead, I made a quiet decision. I would no longer let their behavior push me into anger. I needed a plan, not another argument. A few days later, something strange happened. On a weekday morning when I would normally be out teaching, I decided to stay home and rest. Around noon, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, I saw Henry's parents standing there, visibly startled to see me. Their expressions quickly shifted to forced politeness as they pushed past me without invitation. They wandered through the house, examining every corner with suspicious interest. "Still holding up well," Willie muttered. Catherine nodded approvingly as she peered into the kitchen. Their behavior felt rehearsed, purposeful. They weren't visiting, they were inspecting. When they finally left, they exchanged knowing glances that confirmed my suspicions. They were plotting something behind my back. Soon after, my fears materialized. One evening, as I returned home from work, I saw a large moving truck parked in front of our house. My heart sank. The words, "Moving Center," were painted across its side. Henry stood beside the truck, talking with two movers. When he noticed me, his face turned pale, and he quickly turned away, pretending to busy himself with paperwork. Moments later, his parents arrived, smiling smugly, as if the day were some kind of celebration. Inside, the house no longer felt like mine. My furniture, my carefully chosen pieces that reflected years of hard work, was gone. In its place stood their old, mismatched furniture from decades ago. My heart pounded as I realized what had happened. Henry, in his quiet scheming, had replaced my life piece by piece with theirs. I sat down on the couch, surrounded by their stares. Henry's parents looked pleased, almost triumphant. Henry avoided my eyes, his hands fidgeting. Then, after a long silence, he spoke. "Amy," he began coldly, "I've sold the house to my parents, and I think it's time we got a divorce." For a moment, the room spun. But surprisingly, I didn't feel the panic I had expected. Instead, a calm, almost detached clarity washed over me. I had known this day would come. "I see," I said simply. I signed the divorce papers he handed me, removed my wedding ring, and placed it on the table between us. His parents exchanged satisfied glances. What they didn't know was that I had been prepared all along. Months earlier, when I had begun to suspect their plotting, I installed discreet surveillance cameras around the house, small, barely noticeable devices linked to my phone. I had watched hours of footage, my husband and his parents talking in hushed tones, laughing as they discussed selling the house, and even forging parts of the sale paperwork. Every secret conversation had been recorded, every deceit captured. When I left that house, I did so without a fight, but with a plan. I arranged for the mortgage, which had always been under my name, to be transferred to Henry's. He and his parents wanted ownership, they would now bear the responsibility that came with it. The monthly payment was $3,800, an amount that Henry, unemployed and drowning in gambling debt, could never sustain. I started fresh in a modest but peaceful apartment across town. The first morning I woke up there, sunlight filtered through new curtains I had chosen myself. There was silence, no shouting, no smell of alcohol, no resentment hanging in the air. It felt like breathing freely after years underwater. Weeks later, that peace was interrupted. On a quiet afternoon, the doorbell rang. Standing there were Henry and his parents, their faces pale and anxious. Without waiting for an invitation, they stormed in and threw papers onto my coffee table. "You changed the loan name," Henry shouted. "You tricked us." I calmly explained that the loan had always been mine to begin with, and that transferring it to him was perfectly legal since he now owned the house. They were stunned when they realized the full weight of the debt. When Henry finally checked the loan details online, his face drained of color. The interest, late fees, and payment schedule were crushing. Their arrogance quickly turned to desperation. They pleaded for help, reminding me of the good years, as if nostalgia could erase betrayal. But I had nothing left to give. With steady resolve, I told them I wished them well and closed the door, this time for good. In the months that followed, I heard that Henry had taken a part-time job and moved with his parents into a small apartment on the outskirts of town. The house I once cherished was eventually foreclosed, standing empty, a monument to their greed and my survival. As for me, I devoted myself to my craft. I launched a blog sharing my handmade designs and tutorials. To my surprise, it gained thousands of readers. Orders for workshops, online classes, and collaborations poured in. My once small hobby became a flourishing business, bringing me not just income, but a sense of empowerment I hadn't felt in years. One quiet evening, while organizing old files, I found an old household ledger from the early days of my marriage. I sat down and flipped through its pages, rows of neat handwriting recording every meal, every expense, every small attempt to make our life better. I smiled, realizing how far I had come. That ledger was no longer a record of survival, it was proof of how deeply I had once cared. Now, I had learned to care for myself instead. I closed the book gently, placed it back on the shelf, and looked around my new home. It wasn't large, but it was warm, peaceful, and entirely mine. For the first time in many years, I felt free.